This episode of Trifles is brought to you by the BSI Press. Manuscripts, collections of papers by international writers, and books covering a wide range of other Sherlockian topics. Find them online at BakerStreetIrregulars.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the stockbroker clerked, Lady Frances Carfax disappeared, and Bruce Partington planned, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever wondered what a commissionaire does? Or what a compositor is? Or of the difference between a stevedore and a stoker?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 238, Jellyfish. Well, hello there, and welcome back to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we look at some of the details in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
And Burt, it's a great day to be at the beach.
A day at the beach. You know, doing a Trifles episode with you is a lot like a day at the beach.
Yeah, you get sand in your shorts, and it's just all kinds of uncomfortable. I understand.
That's
well,
right.
If you would like to get more information that we have to share with you, the show notes for this episode are available at ihose.co/trifles238. That'll take you to our website where you can find all kinds of things, including links to some of the things we're talking about here and the ability to connect with us on social media where we are I Hear of Sherlock. You can leave us a comment right there on the show notes, or you can email us if you'd like to do so at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com and support the show via Patreon right there on the page. And one more thing, for our Patreon supporters, if you support the show, we have bonus content available for you. One little clip of some, well, rather embarrassing outtakes that happened while we were trying to remember certain names on the show, and also an additional point of discussion, something that we should have included in the show proper, but we didn't have room. So make sure you're supporting us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month, and you'll have access to that bonus content. Well, you know, I suppose this is one of those episodes that should come with a massive spoiler alert. If you do not yet understand how jellyfish come to figure into the Sherlock Holmes stories, please put whatever device down that you're listening to us on and go read the case book. I won't give it away exactly which story we're talking about if you haven't shut off the show yet, but for those who do know, we, of course, are talking about the story called The Lion's Mane. In our last episode, we concluded by talking about one of the stories in which Holmes did the narrative himself, The Blanched Soldier. Well, this is the other story, The Lion's Mane. And, of course, this actually figures in our series of episodes that we are doing this year. Every month we are doing an episode on exotic animals. Everything from cheetahs and baboons to mongoose and lab rats and other things. Well, we are up to jellyfish. And really, there's only one place in the canon where we find jellyfish. So, interestingly enough, we were looking for source material to discuss jellyfish. And of course, everyone knows that when you get to the Lion's Mane and, who is it? McPherson? That screams it out, or is that Stackhurst? I'm getting my characters mixed up here. It was Ian Murdoch who said Cyanea. And this of course is Cyanea capillata.
Of course.
Cyanea capillata, which is Holmes actually doesn't really know what it is that he's talking about himself. Of course, he says the lion's mane, very similar to an early tale where I guess it was Julius Stoner who said it was the band, the speckled band. And same kind of thing here. You've got somebody who is, mysteriously dying on the beach. He's got these welts, these lash marks across his back. And he says, it was the lion's mane. Well, for God's sake, why didn't you just say it was a jellyfish? Or it was a snake. I mean, people are going with the, with the phylum and genus or the common name rather than the simple explanation as to what it was. That's my only thing. Of course, if they had done that, we wouldn't have had stories called The Speckled Band and The Lion's Mane, and there wouldn't have been anything for Holmes or anyone else to solve. It would have been pretty straightforward.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could sit down and title this story The Jellyfish, but right after you did that, you would say, wait a second.
Yeah. Now where do I go with this?
Yeah, that's like your prior suggestion about the Musgrave ritual, that it really should be called The Butler Did It.
The Butler Did It, yes. That is
Maybe
a good
not.
one.
Maybe not.
Well, in this case, Holmes has to go to his library, right? He needed to look it up. And of course, before he had done that, he left Murdoch in the care of the housekeeper. They went down to the edge of the pool, and Holmes said, "Slowly I walked round the edge of the water, my comrades in Indian file behind me. Most of the pool was quite shallow, but under the cliff where the beach was hollowed out, it was 4 or 5 feet deep. It was to this part that a swimmer would naturally go, for it formed a beautiful, pellucid green pool as clear as crystal. A line of rocks lay above it at the base of the cliff, and along this I led the way, peering eagerly into the depths behind me. I had reached the deepest and stillest pool when my eyes caught that for which they were searching, and I burst into a shout of triumph. 'Cyanea!' I cried. 'Cyanea! Behold, the lion's mane!' The strange object at which I pointed did indeed look like a tangled mass torn from the mane of a lion. It lay upon a rocky shelf some 3 feet under the water, a curious waving, vibrating, hairy creature with streaks of silver among its yellow tresses. It pulsated with a slow, heavy dilation and contraction. 'It has done mischief enough. Its day is over,' I cried. 'Help me, Stackhurst. Let us end the murderer forever.' There was a big boulder just above the ledge, and we pushed it until it fell with a tremendous splash into the water. When the ripples had cleared, we saw that it had settled upon the ledge below. One flapping edge of yellow membrane showed that our victim was beneath it. A thick, oily scum oozed out from below the stone and stained the water round, rising slowly to the surface."
It's a lovely thing. And, this, we should just mention parenthetically that this case, the appearance of the lion's mane, the dreaded Cyanea capillata, was a big feature in the event that led to the resurgence of the Sherlock Holmes Society of London in England, because at the Abbey House Baker Street exhibition, for which ran from May to September of 1951, there were exhibits about some scientific problems mentioned in the cases of Sherlock Holmes, including one that quite dramatically laid out this creature and also asked some very interesting questions. Now, what's going on here, too, is that Holmes is referring to a real book, Out of Doors, he says, by the famous observer J.G. Wood. Well, you learned in that exhibition, if you were at the Abbey House exhibition, that this was a book published in 1874, and it was the authority cited by Holmes, and it was a very popular in its day natural history book. So that was there in the exhibition. But also they exhibited a specimen of Cyanea capillata and had some interesting questions, about the tentacles, about how they appeared. Could it be a result of the preservation? And also mentioned, there's a northern variety, Arctica, sometimes separated as a distinct species that may reach extraordinary proportions, the central disc attaining a diameter of 7 feet and the tentacles extending to perhaps 150 feet from the center. And at the exhibition, the Dr. W.T. Williams, who arranged these exhibits, commented that, it's possible that it was this form of the creature that the Reverend J.G. Wood encountered off Margate. And it had been frequently recorded from the North Sea and as far down as the coasts of northern France.
Well, I think Holmes mentions at the opening of the Lion's Mane that there was a southwest gale. They had just overcome a storm which would have washed it down toward the coast as a result. So entirely possible that this is the specific variety that made its way south. Well, we're going to go a little further south just after this quick word. In 2021, the BSI Press features 3 new volumes. That's right, 3 volumes, including one from the manuscript series, one from the Professions series, and one dedicated to the outgoing head of the BSI. First, the manuscript series, you'll hear about the Staunton tragedy, that is, the missing 3/4. Mike Whalen, the former head of the BSI, has edited this book in which a number of authors take aim at the missing 3/4. You'll learn about rugby, you'll learn about the mystery, you'll learn about, many things in the latest manuscript series. And in the latest Profession series, Michael Quigley and Marcia Pollock edit this volume that brings together corporals, colonels, and commissionaires as they look at military in the canon. And the third volume is A Quiet Air of Mastery, essays in honor of Mike Whalen as he steps down as the head of the Baker Street Irregulars. And that's edited by Les Klinger. All of these and more are available at bakerstreetirregulars.com under the BSI Press section. Be sure to pick up your copy today. Incidentally, we should note that if you would like more information on jellyfish, more than we could possibly make apparent in this episode, we do have a couple of links there in the show notes to jellyfish. Now, Bert, you were mentioning this wonderful exhibit at the 1951 Sherlock Holmes exhibition, arranged by Dr. W.T. Williams. I would imagine that these jellyfish, certainly the Cyanea capillata on display there, was a preserved specimen. It was not a live specimen in an aquarium.
Yes, I think that's safe.
That's unfortunate.
Because even then, there was no such thing. Purina did not make jellyfish chow. And it would have been very difficult for them to maintain a live specimen.
Well, that's too bad. I have been to occasional aquariums where I have seen lion's mane jellyfish on exhibit. But I can't imagine them being at 221B Baker Street or thereabouts for the exhibition. Well, when it comes to jellyfish chow, the good doctor says there's no other authenticated case of Cyanea causing the death of a man.
Right.
Nor is it normally regarded as likely to do so. But of course, remember that McPherson, who was the victim, the initial victim before Murdoch went down and got himself stung, he was crippled by heart trouble from rheumatic fever as a child. So that would have weakened his constitution and made him possibly more susceptible to the kinds of stings and venom that the jellyfish would have injected as part of that. Now, I think more common in thinking about jellyfish, the more common and fearsome member of the jellyfish family that people certainly know is the Portuguese Man of War. or Man of War. It's Physalia, I think it's called. Or no, Carvella.
No, I think that's right.
Is it Physalia?
Yeah. She was also Odysseus's cousin, wasn't she? I think Physalia. Because he was always yelling, "Come in!" for crying out loud from the ocean. Enough swimming, Physalia.
There you go. Yeah. Interestingly enough, the Portuguese Man of War is not a single jellyfish, but it's a colony, an aggregate of organisms that function as an individual, kind of like the modern corporation. But it's not a very close relative of the ordinary jellyfishes that Cyanea is representative of. We're told by Dr. Williams here. It is, however, he says, a far more formidable object to the bather. The tentacles of the relatively small specimen exhibited might, when fully extended, reach to perhaps 50 feet from the central float. And much larger specimens, such as the remarkable Atlantic form described by Haeckel under the name Carvella, are on record. It's typically found in warmer waters, though, as Holmes suggested, it might well be driven up the Sussex coast by a southwest gale. Occasionally recorded off of our southern shores, he writes.
Interesting. And then, of course, that's a lovely thing, by the way, about this exhibition. You know, look at what all of this information digging into jellyfish. I mean, this is really reflects, you know, the inquiring minds of people who are fascinated by the cases of Sherlock Holmes. But Dr. Williams, who again arranged all these exhibitions back in 1951, has here a curious difficulty so far as either of these organisms is concerned, the Portuguese Man of War or the so-called Cyanea capillata, the lion's mane. A curious difficulty is Holmes tells us that it lay upon a rocky shelf some 3 feet under the water. Well, the point here is it can't be too strongly emphasized that these creatures float. They float. It might be that one was stranded at low water and had become entangled, but it's extremely improbable. And Holmes dismisses anything that's improbable to get to the truth. So, and then the way the animal was disposed of by dropping rocks upon it, it's pointed out here in the records of the exhibition at Abbey House. This method of dropping rocks upon it would represent a somewhat inefficient means of disposal, which I think could well be the understatement of today.
It could. Well, especially if it was a Portuguese man of war, because as we heard, these are colonies of aggregated jellyfish. It would have simply broken the colonies up only to be reformed in some other way. And at the same time, you know, you had that oil slick there. Holmes was responsible for a jellyfish oil spill.
Another early recognition of the failure of colonial attitudes. And that is not a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Views are spectacular.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles.
Coastline in the country.
Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.